Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about Caspa because we've seen at least what I would consider market comparables kind of doing relatively well, SUI being the main one in particular. And as we've seen SUI kind of start to lose some steam and maybe even pull back a little bit, I'm starting to wonder if maybe we might see kind of a rotation into another one of these kind of third generation blockchains. And Caspa is one of them that is considered a third generation blockchain, and they're also one that I like quite a lot, and I think it's got a pretty bright future. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive right in. So starting out, what we can see is overall, we've got a pretty red day on the market. We have a couple coins up here and there. SPX has been one that's actually it's done actually quite well over the past about month or so, and so this one kind of continues to run. But everything else overall is kind of down on the day overall. We can see we have moved to kind of down on the week. Ape has been kind of the big winner of the week. Jupiter, Pendle, Doge, Popcat, Beam, Helium, Mu. These are kind of some of the other big ones. But ultimately, like, red on the week overall, kind of for most. One of, I think, the refreshing things to see here is Sol is actually up 7%, which is not bad, especially when we look at, kind of how many are red on the week. I think this looks pretty good. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. Overall, coins are struggling. SUI is one that is kind of on its way down. Not super surprising, just because it has seen kind of some ridiculous runs up, and so that's something that I do think that we will see. Maybe start to level off before it potentially and very likely, if I had to guess, continues kind of its next leg up. So what I want to talk about today is kind of doing a compare and contrast between the Gen 3 blockchains, kind of with an emphasis on Kaspa, because I am personally a fan of Kaspa. I think Kaspa has the best tokenomics. I think Kaspa kind of has the most novel model as far as something new. I think this is both a positive and a negative. And so, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But ultimately, that's kind of what I wanted to dive into. So let's take a look at that now. So to start, I wanted to take a look at the Kaspa coin gecko, because what we can see here is this is what we've seen actually since for the past year. And then if we pull this back to what we've seen kind of year to date, we will have seen that we're pretty flat kind of year on the day, right? So, we could see a pretty big run up like late February, another pretty decent run up kind of like late July, but we've kind of pulled back. We are still above where we started the year, but not by a whole lot. What we can see here, though, is the fully diluted valuation. And this is something that's really nice because it is fully diluted. There's no unlocks coming. There's not going to be any outside sell pressure other than what we see kind of within Kaspa itself. And most of the sell pressure is very likely going to be coming from the miners, because they have to pay for their electricity and operating costs and all that type of stuff. So that's going to be kind of where most of the built-in sell pressure comes from. But that's kind of a very similar model to Bitcoin, which does mean that we could have kind of a similar, kind of ebb and flow of kind of the cycle overall. Overall, like this in the bull market, the fully diluted valuation realistically doesn't matter. This is something that no one realistically is going to be looking at, especially as a lot of less sophisticated retail investors come in. I would almost guarantee you most of them aren't even looking at market cap at all. They're just going to be looking at price and coming up with some arbitrary number. For Kaspa, I think $1 is kind of the first natural one to think of, but they're just going to have kind of these arbitrary numbers where they're kind of doing things, right? The fully diluted valuation, in my opinion, really only matters when we get into the bear market. Coins that have a very high fully diluted valuation compared to their market cap, it is my belief that they're going to get absolutely wrecked, because there's that much extra outside sell pressure baked into the coin that just happens over time. And when you're already in a bearish market, these people that are going to be unlocking, especially if they got in on insider rounds and early rounds, they're still very likely going to be up, even if the price is down 50% from all-time highs, that they're going to be locking in those gains. And so there's going to be a massive amount of sell pressure on the coin, more than usual. Where with something like Kaspa, obviously it's a bear market, right? Everything is going to be getting sold off, but they're not going to have that added double whammy of sell pressure outside of what is just going to be always there from the miners. So looking at the Kaspa chart on Margex, what we can see is I have pulled in SUI and Aptos just so we can kind of see how the returns have kind of shaken out for the year so far. So this starts at January 1, and we can see that, kind of where we're at to date. So, Aptos is up about 9% year to date, Kaspa 22% year to date, and SUI 128% year to date. Obviously, we can kind of see this year, Kaspa has been relatively stable. Obviously, it's been lower on the ups. It's been higher on the downs. So it's something that like has been kind of more of a stable coin, I guess, so to speak, this year, where, you know, something like SUI in particular has seen very massive highs and very, very massive lows. Same thing with Aptos. Aptos hasn't moved as much as SUI. SUI so far kind of seems, in my opinion, to kind of be the shining star of the cycle so far. It kind of does remain to be seen, at least to me, if we start to see some of the gains, you know, kind of as we pull back on SUI, if we start to see them rotate into things like Aptos or Say or Kaspa or other of these kind of like third gen blockchains, just because that I think kind of makes a little bit sense to me. If I had to pick a favorite, I don't think it's much of a secret. Kaspa would probably be my favorite. If I had to pick one that is probably going to do the best, I would pick SUI. I guess let me amend that statement. If I had to pick one that is going to do best in this upcoming bull market, I would pick SUI. If I had to pick one that's probably going to do worse in this upcoming bear market, it's very likely SUI. Then looking at Say and Aptos, I want to kind of take a look of what they're doing and kind of how their tokenomics shake out, how their price is done, all of that type of stuff. We can see that Aptos price has actually done worse than Caspa overall on the year. Say actually is not tracked in like this trading view plugin, so we'll just have to kind of look at them as is. But what we can see is they're actually down on the year. So they started the year at 71 cents. They are now at 43. Not great, obviously. We can see their market cap is the smallest of the three. SUI is about 5.5 ish. Caspa is about 3.3. Aptos is about 5.4, and then Say is at 1.6. So this is kind of the smallest one. This is the one that stands to have the most upside, but also usually the ones that have the most upside also stand to have the most risk. And so what we can see here, fully diluted valuation, it's about 37.5% diluted. We know from my video yesterday, or I guess 2 days ago, SUI is only 27% diluted. And then if we look at Aptos, we can see again comparable market cap with SUI with a fully diluted market cap. It's about 50% ish diluted. So, of kind of the big ones, obviously Kaspa is the best because it's fully diluted. It's a fair, it's a free mint or a fair mint, I guess is what they're calling it, or what they call it. There's no like insider rounds, nothing like that. I think that's why Kaspa has such a strong community and why its price has stayed so stable, is because a lot of the people who are in it because they like it, they believe in the tech, they want to be in it, and they're not VCs looking for a quick profit that they're going to dump as soon as their unlock matures. What we can see here with Aptos and Say, these are kind of going more of the like VC route, very similar to SUI. Obviously, kind of to varying degrees of success, with SUI kind of being the big one. But I want to focus on Kaspa particularly because I do think Kaspa has a lot of potential room to run as we start to see this narrative catch on. I do think because Kaspa has a larger float, this is kind of why I think SUI will do the best, is because it has a lower float, which means it's easier to move and manipulate the price. I think Kaspa may ultimately end up being one that doesn't move as dramatically as some of the others, but I also think it's the one that might be the most sustainable because of the no float, or the no lockups and the fair mine and all that type of stuff. And so what we can see is, let's actually just get rid of these and we'll bring in the Bollinger Bands. So what we can see is, the Bollinger Bands have started to kind of consolidate or condense a little bit. So we could be starting to see, potentially a dramatic move in some direction. I think our hope is that it would be kind of a move to the upside. But what we can see here is, we had a little bit of a bounce off of this kind of level of support here. We've kind of come up. We are running into kind of a level of resistance kind of at this point. Where we kind of continue, we are kind of sitting on the very middle side, or I guess just below the middle point of the Bollinger Band. So, definitely kind of within kind of the expected range. So I don't see any kind of snap back to the middle or anything like that coming soon. Overall, it looks pretty good. We can see the RSI is low, and it's actually been kind of on the verge of oversold for kind of the past couple weeks or so. So, potentially, again, not financial advice. You need to make your own decisions, things like that. But potentially a decent time to buy. It's looking like this is definitely, an underappreciated coin. Generally, kind of the general way to look at this is if everybody's talking about it, you probably don't want to be buying it. And if everybody's talking about it, you want to be selling it. And so, this is something that I think kind of applies to Caspa right now too, right? People aren't really talking about it. It's not the shiny object on the shelf right now. That is definitely currently SUI. And so, potentially if we start to see some funds rotate out of SUI into others, we might see Caspa be one of those that kind of comes back into the limelight. And if it does, then, that's the point at which maybe we start looking at taking some profits, things like that. Again, not financial advice, but what we can see, the volume is holding pretty well. We haven't seen kind of a tail off in volume like we've seen with some of the others, Jasmine kind of being the big one that comes to mind immediately. But things are looking good, I would say, overall, and so what we're talking about here is, kind of, it's just more of kind of a watch and wait. We need to, if we understand the technology, we understand kind of the vision, we understand kind of what it's supposed to do, things like that, then we just got to wait and we've got to see kind of how it matures and things like that. So as you can see, I have been doing all my charting on Margex. I do kind of a lot of my analysis and everything on Margex. I do use Margex to trade leverage. So if that's something that you are interested in doing as well, you can feel free to use my link in the description below. It is kind of a pretty nice place to trade leverage. Caspa, I believe you can do up to 50x leverage. So if you want to trade some of these Caspa moves specifically, especially since we've kind of been ranging, this can be a kind of a decent time to do relatively well, particularly when trading leverage. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to check out in the comments section below. There is no KYC or VPN required, so it does make it really nice to just kind of get started and signed up and trading and all that. So moving on, the next thing that I want to talk about is going on to kind of Casplex, reviewing KRC20s, and then also going back to the kind of the base chain and looking at how the performance of Caspa has been doing so far. What we can see with Casplex, things looking kind of decent. A lot of CAS paid as gas fees. We can see 58, almost 59 million KRC20 transactions made. We can see 1,100 tokens deployed. For just being, I think, less than 2 months old at this point, like, this is some decent traction. Things are looking pretty good. The ecosystem overall seems to be kind of developing at a pretty decent pace. Still definitely very small, 1,100 tokens deployed over the course of 2 months. Definitely, not at the same level of like, Solana, who probably has like 1,100 tokens created every day. But, you got to start somewhere and kind of seeing continued growth and continued activity kind of growing in the KRC20 ecosystem is definitely what we want to see. I think a lot of kind of this growth will be predicated on kind of as the base kind of blockchain, or I guess BLOCKDAG in this case, matures, seeing how that can handle a lot of the stress, and ultimately it being kind of a better alternative to what we have currently in the market. The next thing that I wanted to go to is taking a look at Caspalytics, and this is where we're going to go kind of into all things Caspa, trying to get a general sense of the health of the ecosystem, the network, how it's holding up, all that type of stuff. So what we can see lately is we had kind of this parabolic growth in the Caspa mining. It has started to kind of, it's still growing, don't get me wrong, it is definitely still growing, but it's been a little bit kind of slowed down a little bit on the increase. And I think a lot of this is due to kind of the decrease that we've seen in price. I mean, if you're looking here where Caspa's 20 cents and, we're looking at like half an exo hash, or even like more ridiculous, it's like at 18 cents and we got 0.17 exo hashes. Like, this is something where if you had a Caspa miner at this point in time, you were very likely making a ton of money. Right now, probably not so much. It might still be relatively profitable, but we're getting to the point where this is something where, it's starting to like kind of level off because the demand, or the like risk reward is not as like ridiculous as it was like at this point in time, right? And so we're starting to see a lot of that, but still definitely like very strong and sustained growth within the Caspa like hash rate, which is good. What we can see on transaction counts, as we can see lately, so when we saw this spike, I think this was due to the start of KRC20s, and then we can see lately we actually had another like really massive spike coming. But ever since like the launch of KRCs, we can see a ton more activity happening on the system. This is something that, obviously we would like to see trend up and not having these like ridiculous spikes with like kind of, trending back down and then spike and, all that type of stuff. We do kind of want to see a nice like trend up over time, but kind of for where we're at here in time, like it looks pretty good overall. I think this is looking good. If we're looking at unique number of active addresses, we can see we're sitting at about 122K. This is something that does look a little bit nicer. Again, we still kind of see the spike with the drop, but there definitely is like a trend up. It's not a clean trend line, but if we were to kind of map this, like we would definitely see a trend line to the upside, which is definitely, really good. Here's one thing that I want to take a look at too is fees. We can see that fees paid have gone up, which is also very nice, particularly for the miners and whatnot. This is going to contribute to the overall like long-term health of the system. Again, same spikes that we're seeing here. Don't love to see that, but some, I guess, very spotty and very like aggressive activity at certain points in time is better than no activity at all. And so, this is still something that's nice to see. We're at least having some like action happening on the ecosystem. One thing that I did want to take a look here though at is average transactions per second. And what we can see here is like we're sitting at like less than 1 transaction per second for a lot of this stuff. We can see a spike here to 100 and another spike here to 120. Again, same type of thing, we're seeing these kind of dramatic spikes happening. This obviously is not at all where we want to be in terms of what it can handle, right? But just because it's doing, 0.89 transactions per second doesn't mean that's all it can handle. That just might mean that's all the demand is. And I would say that that's probably the case. I think the demand right now is just not super heavy on the Caspa ecosystem. And so that's something that, it doesn't really have to deal with these massive like spikes in activity. And what we can see is when we do see spikes in activity, we don't ever hear about the Caspa ecosystem going down, which does indicate that like it can actually handle these spikes. In Solana's early days, if it would have seen spikes like this, which it did, it crashed. So, that is kind of a vote of confidence to say that like it can handle spikes in activity. But ultimately, again, if this is a Gen 3 blockchain, right, like we need to be seeing 100,000 transactions per second, 500,000 transactions per second, 1 million transactions per second. Like we need to be seeing a ridiculous amount of transactions per second. And so what we can see is it's definitely trending in a positive direction, but we haven't really necessarily stress tested the network yet. And that will just kind of happen over time as we kind of grow into it. This is very similar to like what we're seeing on SUI right now, right? Like they've essentially like stress tested up to, I think it's like 297,000 transactions per second. Just because they can do it doesn't mean they are, right? I think right now, like they're about the same, like they're maybe doing like 100 transactions per second. Now, again, like that's not an indication to say that it can't scale to, some ridiculous scale. It just doesn't need to right now, right? And so there's no need to like push transactions through that aren't there. So that's kind of one of the things to think about is, even though this does look really low, we kind of have to look more at the roadmap and kind of take the developers at their word for kind of what the plan is for how they're going to get there. Because ultimately, like the transaction volume isn't there yet, right? I think probably Ethereum is the only one that we've really realistically seen at this point that has like had issues with transaction volume. And that wasn't necessarily even in the sense of like it couldn't handle the transaction volume. It was just more of fees just got ridiculously expensive and it kind of pushed people off the chain just by way of not being able to afford it. And so we haven't really seen what this looks like as far as really pushing kind of the capacity of one of these like new next generation blockchains that can handle a ridiculous number of blocks per second or transactions per second. So anyway, that's kind of how I'm looking at the state of kind of these third generation blockchains. I do think Kaspa will have its day in the sun. It's a kind of a unique and a novel idea. With that, it obviously there does come, a little bit of risk with something like SUI or Say or Aptos. Like everybody knows what a blockchain is. Everybody understands how it works. Everybody gets why it works. Like the problem there is very, very clearly defined, and we need something that can scale. Old Ethereum can't do it. Couldn't do it. So now they're working towards going through to like the layer 2 approach, right? Solana is also trying to be an answer to that, but they're also trying to go like more of the monolithic approach. So, and then you also have SUI and Say and Aptos and Kaspa and all these others. They're trying to take their piece of the pie as well and come up with some sort of value prop that like makes sense and resonates with investors and ultimately kind of allows them to continue to develop and obviously appreciate the price of the coin and all that type of stuff. One other thing I will mention with Kaspa, this is something kind of not related to crypto at all, but just kind of more around geopolitics. I do wonder if Kaspa's price is kind of lagging a little bit because most of the core developers and a lot of the main development team is in Israel. And so if there were to be a wider war that broke out concerning Israel, I would say this would be bearish news for Kaspa overall, just because so much of their development is centralized in Israel right now. This could be realistically something that is holding the price back a little bit because, why is something going to moon when there's a lot of what we could think is realistically possible risk that is like kind of sitting there. So anyway, that's just something to consider as well if you are looking at, potentially making an investment in Caspa or anything. Again, none of this stuff is investment advice, but just something to consider if that's something you're thinking about. Anyway, if you did find the information in this video useful, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really, really does help me out. I know we went over a ton of information in this video, but I felt like all of it was pretty relevant and necessary. If you had anything in particular that you enjoyed or that you thought was, particularly useful or you liked kind of more than some other stuff, please leave me some feedback in the comment section. I do try to read and respond to all of my comments, and seeing things like this really, really does help me out because it gives me kind of an idea of what particularly, about Caspa you guys like, what's most interesting to you, if there's any questions you have that I can maybe help answer, things like that. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.